Merkel Media.
What does the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
Then what? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Well, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dave on NBC.
Jack Marius Tack Theratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. Steven Seagal.
Sex offender guy.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Mumbai Kutafi.
I'm Rick James, bitch.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And uncovering the centuries-long plan for world domination.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Let's talk about Chinese people.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Swangles and Fort Lauderdale?
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the Sears hardware department.
Nothing could be more fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host,
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault.
He was a retard.
I get some goddamn diuretic.
Welcome to Macroaggressions. I'm your host, Charlie Robinson. If you are watching this on Iconic, Rockfin, Odyssey, or YouTube, or you're listening wherever podcasts are served, thank you so much. We couldn't do it without you. We couldn't do it without the amazing support of our sponsors. My Patriot Supply has been nice enough to create a web landing page for us called preparewithmacroaggressions.com. My God, if you are living through the end of 2021 and you are not thinking about getting yourself prepared, then you need to have your head examined. I'm not saying you have to go buy preparation materials through my sponsors, but for God's sake, do something about it. Start thinking about it. Start doing it on your own. This is a situation where you are better off a month or 2 early than being a day late. You don't want to be in a situation where you have to deal with you don't want to have to deal with the general public in order to get food. Think about these things, plan accordingly. You're listening to weird programs like this. You're going to get information that nobody else has. Take advantage of it. Go to preparewithmacroaggressions.com. You can get a 4-week supply. You can get a 3-month supply of food. They've got great discounts on there for you. I've got my own. I bought some, sent it to my mom. It's not the most glorious Christmas present she's ever going to get, but I'll tell you what, if the shit hits the fan, she's going to be really grateful that she's got that. So start thinking about that. If you want to buy something for your friends, get it for your family. And by the way, no need to freak them out. Just tell them it's for an earthquake, not a global collapse, but we know what it's coming. So take a look at preparewithmacroaggressions.com. See if it's right for you. If it is, pull the trigger. If not, that's cool. Also, True Hemp Science, they are our newest sponsor. They've been amazing. They came in with some great CBD-related products. And, everybody's making CBD. It's hard to tell the efficacy of it. It's hard to tell what's working, what doesn't work, but I have a bad shoulder injury. And when Chris approached me from True Hemp Science, he sent me some products and I said to him, listen, if this thing can fix my shoulder, then I'm in. 2 weeks, shoulder fixed. I don't know how it works. I don't know why it works. I just know that it works. So I'll tell you what, if you're interested, go and check it out. truehempscience.com/macroaggressions. Take a look, see if there's anything that's right for you. If you spend $65 or more, they will send you a free bottle of number 81 distillate, which is a $26 value. Take it. take a look at the products on your way out. Use the promo code MACRO to save yourself some money. He sent me a great lineup of products. I've been taking it ever since he sent it, and the results for me have been fantastic. So they have free shipping on everything over $150. So it's worth checking out. truehempscience.com/macroaggressions. All righty. Now that the business is out of the way, let's get down to it. I've been no secret that I'm a fan of Frank from Quite Frankly. Love the show. Been watching it for a while. He had me on as a guest. I've had him on as a guest. Love the guy. One of Frank's favorite guests is Jim Lee from Climate Viewer. So I have blatantly and obviously poached Jim Lee from Frank, and I don't even apologize for it. So climateviewer.com. It is the one and only Jim Lee. What's going on, Jim? How are you?
Pretty good. It's a open bromance that Frank and I have. So I think that we're okay with mutually cheating on each other.
Okay. I don't want to offend him. I don't want to steal his guys, but every time you're on, you lay it out in a way that makes so much sense that I feel like people are getting bogged down with the climate stuff. They're getting heavy doses of science and science that they're unprepared to or unqualified to unpack. And it seems a bit heavy, but then you come along and you have this way of explaining the science in a way that doesn't sound so sciencey, and people go, "Oh, I get it. This makes sense." And what we've seen lately, and I've done a couple episodes recently talking about how the powers that shouldn't be are making this pivot to climate change. And we know who these people are. We know that they're psychopathic maniacs that don't want what's best for us. We know that they're pathological liars that are always building these narratives and agendas to get what they want. And it's never what we want. And it's always some sort of trap. So here comes climate change, right? And climate change is going to kill everybody. And we're going to have, it's the skinny polar bear on the shrinking ice.
I thought it was global warming, though.
Yeah.
Wait, let's not call it that anymore, because the climate will always change.
Right.
Let's call it climate change, because then we'll get away from the fact that if it doesn't warm, it's still changing.
Right.
But continue.
It's genius. And so I go back. So my whole beef with all of it started with the Club of Rome's book, The Limits to Growth, where they talk about how they're going to use the idea of global warming, pollution, and they didn't call it climate change at the time, but that's what they're talking about as the pretext to fundamentally transform society through a carbon tax and create the mechanisms for a one world government. They literally say they're going to use it as the pretext for that, and that it doesn't matter if it is real or one imagined for these purpose. So they're already right out of the blocks telling us we're going to be doing some lying. So I don't know exactly what to make of the details of all of the climate change components. So I wanted to bring you in and talk about some of the differences. I mean, I think that what most people are angry about is pollution, which is real. And
that's something we can all agree on.
Yeah. And that is something that should rightly make people angry. But it feels like these maniacs have hijacked pollution, the very realness of the pollution, and use that for carbon taxes and things like that. How much of this climate change narrative that they're putting out there is anchored in reality, and how much of it is just some sort of disguise so that they can collect a brand new carbon credit?
Well, I think if you're not familiar with Patrick Wood, he's the author of Technocracy Rising, and he runs technocracy.news. I had the pleasure of meeting him at G. Edward Griffin's Freedom Force International 3rd Congress out in Arizona. And he gave me his book. And I'd been studying these topics from climate change to geoengineering, their solution for climate change to block out the sun with chemicals dumped in the stratosphere, mimicking volcanoes, weather control, and all of these things. But then it all kind of synchronistically tied a bow on all of the things from the New World Order to all of the NGOs, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the New World Order. And I was sitting here just dumbfounded that I had not heard of the technocracy movement of the 1930s. And this tied directly into one of the other major topics that I talk about. I talk about the 3 Ps: pollution, privacy, and propaganda. Mm-hmm. Because if you talk about pollution, generally speaking, they don't want you to really focus on things that are tangible. They want to focus on the intangible. So they're going to violate your privacy. They're going to hack your computer. They're going to dig up all the information they can on you. And they're going to use that to make propaganda about you and about the things you say, whether it be in the mainstream media or alt media or wherever, or just with sock puppet fake accounts, create 100,000 Twitter mob and, make a false impression of, everybody agrees, but none of these people are real. And corporations and all of them bend the knee constantly to these fake mobs of sock puppets. But the technocracy movement started in the 1930s, and its goal was a one world government ruled by the scientific method by an unelected board of bureaucrats that basically handed down policy from afar, rooted in a universal monetary unit that was an energy-based unit. Okay. And all of this jives with what you're seeing going on today. So this tied very closely into my following of trying to figure out where the New World Order came from. Mm-hmm. And I went back to the New World Moral Order Gomberg map, which was right after World War II. But then it branched out, going back to the war offices that, put out all the propaganda before that, and the Council on Foreign Relations that started the whole process, the ball rolling. And when the technocracy movement kind of died off, the Council on Foreign Relations, James Warburg, famously said, we must haul down the American flag and destroy it, spit on it, stamp on it. And it morphed into what was called the New World Federalists. And this is something I've heard nobody talk about.
I've never heard of it.
According to, what I've been able to dig up, as little as I have, it was one of the largest groups in America, with well over 1 million members and several 100,000 local chapters, all through the 60s and 70s. And their goal, their number one stated goal was universal disarmament with only a one world federated government with weapons.
No, thank you.
Yes, starting to all kind of sync up. So whenever I use the word technocrat, it kind of summarizes the ideology that encompasses all things handed down from Club of Rome, Trilateral, Bilderberger, all of these rich bastards that think that their power and influence to control the little people can be exerted through external or existential fear.
Mm. And there's a lot of fear out there.
Yeah, and fear is a number one motivator, whether it comes to selling consumer goods. Let's be frank, you wouldn't be buying survival food if you didn't have a healthy fear and a realistic fear of the global collapse of the monetary system. Absolutely. At any given moment. Or we could have a an electromagnetic pulse from the sun, or a artificial one from a high altitude electromagnetic pulse from a nuclear bomb. North Korea could shoot a nuke 50 miles in the sky over America and knock out the entire power grid. And the Heritage Foundation said 2/3 of Americans would die within 6 months from starvation. So this is a serious, there's a healthy dose of fear to go around, because the weapons just keep getting bigger and scarier. Yeah. Let's not even get into Rod of God yet. But regardless, these technocrats, they keep moving the goalposts. So at first it was, at least in my lifetime, I was born in 1976. Obviously September 11th, 2001 was a big deal. And suddenly everybody was scared that at any moment a terrorist was going to show up and blow up their personal house. Right. Which is completely unrealistic. Yes. But the fear was there and it was healthy. And then we gave up so many of our rights for temporary salvation. Ben Franklin would bitch slap us all. Oh yeah. He'd be right to do it. Yeah, and we'd all deserve it. But that fear started to die down. And just like anything, there's too much football and freaking TikTok for people to care long enough. So that was quickly replaced with, ISIS, and now ISIS isn't really working. That thing kind of got stamped out. Well, now we're going to have axe murderers on the streets everywhere. People driving cars into groups of people. No, this isn't really working out too well either. What's the next thing we can do? Oh yeah, let's release a global bioweapon, because the only way we're ever going to defeat Trump in 2020 is if we crash the economy. Magic bullet, crash of economy incoming. But the thing that I see that's common between COVID-19 and all the mutations since and climate change is that they both rely on technocrats and their computer models. And this goes to what's called perception management, or mind control in the most generic form. Right. Yeah. That technocrats use their argument from authority and their computer models, which are just fascinating toys that, old white dudes who work in Congress who are easily swayed by a fat wallet and a good argument and a healthy fear of, repercussions from their voters. They look at this stuff and they go, well, let me weigh the pros and cons. I got all of these science jerk offs telling me that, if I don't do something, 2 million people are going to die. And if I do something, I'm going to crash the economy, which is worse, stupid. That's the kind of scenario we're put in each time. So now, they came out, they made the predictions. Trump reacted by closing down the economy, probably the dumbest decision in his career, if not, many politicians' careers. And then now we're talking about climate lockdowns. You got Al Gore out there talking about this climate trace program where they're putting satellite, going to use 11,000 sensors around the planet to track down the climate change problem, people and hold them to account. You mean him? Yeah. As he flies around in his private jets and yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I'd like to first see your climate trace sensor network assess the climate impact of COP26. Yes. And all of you rich bastards flying to meet when you could have had a Zoom call and achieved the same you got it. Effect. 400 private jets flying in there. And yeah, you can't have $1,000 meal and, rub each other's buttocks, and photo shoot, to be a Zoom. So that's just not posh enough for the people who are going to tell us how to live our lives. At the end of the day, I think that they use these climate models, they use these COVID models, they use these these threats of existential, these existential fear threats to get people to give up their rights. And they do it through what's called communitarian law. And communitarian law is something that's rarely ever discussed, but it's law for the greater good. It's at the expense of people like myself who consider themselves to be a rugged individualist. I believe in freedom and liberty at the localist level possible, being me. And I am a government of one, except when my wife is involved.
I understand.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I want my government as local and as small as possible. And the further it gets away from my house, the less likely it is to be relevant to me and more likely to be stripping me of my freedom and pissing me off. And I think that generally is, that resonates with most people. You don't want people who don't know you and don't know how you live telling you how to live your life.
Right.
So I think that the whole idea that they use computer models, which do not account for 90% of what's actually going on in the atmosphere, especially aerosol cloud interactions, the greatest unknown in climate science. Yet you have, 1+ billion people on the internet screaming bloody murder about chemtrails on a daily basis. I went to Washington, D.C. and spoke at an EPA hearing on C-SPAN in 2015. And I said, while I appreciate that Obama is trying to appease his COP21 Paris Accord, cronies by regulating greenhouse gases coming out of jet aircraft, we're not concerned as public, people with greenhouse gases. We're concerned about heavy metal particulates, which are poisonous, and clouds that are being created by planes, which have a greater effect on the climate than the sum of all the greenhouse gases you're talking about.
Oh, what was their reaction to you saying that?
Oh man, the guy from the Sierra Club. He, afterwards, I and I quoted all the scientific literature. I'm like, Olivier Boucher. Oh, by the way, he's the head of one of the IPCC papers on aerosol cloud interaction. Admits he doesn't know shit about it. And by the way, we're only accounting for linear contrails, not ones that are fanned out and created cirrus clouds. So we don't know the full impact of this. And I stated very definitively, all of this stuff, and was proved right time and time again. So I talked to the Sierra Club guy who basically this hearing wasn't even supposed to happen. Okay. They just wanted to sweep it under the rug. This was during the Trump-Hillary election. And this was right before it. It was August of 2015. And it's so funny. A friend of mine from Anonymous, the Hacker Collective, was like, bro, I found a text file on a FTP server at the EPA site that said, if you want to have a hearing, please send in your commentary. And I called them and I got a call back from the senior policy analyst at the EPA going, we really don't need to have a hearing. And if you could just submit your stuff in writing, you can take as much time as you like. But if you come here to Washington, you're only going to be allowed 10 minutes to speak. No, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'd like my 10 minutes to speak. So I was the only person in the entire world that responded. So then they had to announce it on the actual official EPA website that a hearing was going to happen. So the International Airline Industry representative, the pilots organization, the ICAO, the Sierra Club, Friends of the Earth, like all of these people had to show up. And when it was all said and done, I, gave my speech, and then I walked up to the Sierra Club guy. I said, "What'd you think about that?" And he's like, "What?" I said, "The cloud thing." He's like, "Oh, that's pure poppycock."
Well, I've got the founder of the Sierra Club, a quote from him in my first book, The Octopus of Global Control, talking about how he's in favor of depopulation. So the Sierra Club is a sketchy organization. Their motto should be shovels are great for planting trees and burying bodies, because that's what they want to do. They want to depopulate this planet. So I'm not surprised that guy was in denial of what you were saying.
Well, in my uncontrollable urge and my Southern charm, I respond to him, well, if we weren't standing in a government building, I'd pop you right in the cock for being such an ignorant asshole. And my friends are immediately like, come on, Jim, let's leave. Let's just leave now.
But being from the South, part of my family's from the South. You can do that in a way that seems somehow charming too. So you can threaten a guy and sound sweet about it at the same time. Well, listen, these people
bless your heart.
Exactly. Bless your heart means something totally different than a lot of people think it means.
Most people have no clue.
It means you're a big dummy. So these people don't want to hear from you about this. But then John Brennan goes on some sort of, I don't forget what it was, some televised...
It was a Council on Foreign Relations meeting talking about geoengineering.
Talking about aerosol injection programs, and now the CIA has been involved in it for a while and everything. So it's like, okay, so we're all crazy, right? So where's our big apology for this? What is the most concerning part about that? You mentioned that they're injecting heavy metals into the atmosphere. What are we talking about? We're talking about barium and aluminum and things like that. And what does it do? And what? And I'm sure there's more than just those items being sprayed. What's the reasoning behind it?
Well, they give many different reasons. Whether it's jet exhaust, which, just contains, a plethora of natural earth elements, but they get turned into nanoparticles and they build up. The higher you fly and the higher you disperse these chemicals, the longer they stay in the atmosphere. So if you were to say spray a whole bunch of aluminum, sulfur, titanium, vanadium, all of calcium, all of these, metals that are coming out of the planes, in the troposphere, which is, under 29,000 feet, we're talking like, 7 miles at the highest. The tropopause is the area between the stratosphere and the troposphere where we live. The stratosphere is where the ozone layer is. The higher you go, the longer it lasts. So in the troposphere, those chemicals might last 2 to 4 weeks. Whereas if you were to dump the same chemicals in the stratosphere, they could last 1 to 3 years.
Oh.
So as you fly higher, and that's actually a solution they proposed just within the last 2 months, we should have planes fly higher so they avoid ice supersaturated regions so they don't create as much clouds, because the clouds trap heat at night like a blanket over the planet, which actually melts the poles, which is what Jim said back at the EPA in 2015. We were all giggling our ass off, but it's actually true. The clouds actually have more of a heat trapping ability than CO2 does any day. And in my world, it's pretty simple. You have the sun, solar activity, you have galactic cosmic rays, which are, shielded by our ionosphere. And if the sun is weak, our shields are down. Galactic cosmic rays combined with dust and water to make clouds. That's the next radiative forcing thing. Then there's water vapor. And then way the hell down here is greenhouse gases. And that is what's controlling our global temperature. And it's normally regulated through phytoplankton, the dimethyl sulfide. Planet gets too hot. Lots of phytoplankton bloom. By the way, that's where we get most of the oxygen from the planets, from the ocean and the phytoplankton. They also sequester carbon and they fart out dimethyl sulfide, which creates clouds. So if everything were in its natural place, and we weren't creating ship tracks from all of these ships that are parked off the coast of LA right now, crossing to China to bring us shit we don't need for all the Walmarts. If we didn't have globalism on the scale that we do, burning bunker fuel, the dirty, heavy fuel oil, which is the most thick, laden, disgusting pollution source possible, creating clouds that are 50 miles wide and several thousand miles long, coating the entire Pacific in marine stratocumulus clouds, which are screwing up the entire claw process of the phytoplankton, regulating the temperature of the planet. Combine that with all the planes creating all the clouds that are trapping heat at night. Yeah, they cool a little bit in the day, but they trap heat at night. So at the end of the day, between the ships and the planes, they want to blame you for your CO2 footprint. But one super tanker, just one super tanker with its bunker fuel and the ship tracks that it emits, produces more CO2 than every single car on the planet.
Wow. So
when you take that into consideration, and then you consider that for the past 100 years on my website, weathermodificationhistory.com, you can actually dig into a timeline from 1800 to present of every single event along the way. And you're going to see two commonalities. Since the 1800s, with like Jules Verne talking about firing a cannon to tilt the axis of the earth and melt the poles, to UNESCO, Huxley talking about atomizing the Arctic. Let's blow up nuclear bombs to melt the Arctic. 1929, let's open the Bering Strait and let the warm Pacific Ocean currents melt the Arctic poles. Two Russian dudes in the 40s and 50s, let's put a metal ring around the planet to reflect sunlight and melt the poles. Oh, they did that. It was called the Westford Needles, Project Westford, where they dumped 280 million dipole antennas into space. Some are still floating around every day, and they have to dodge them in the space station. It's pretty funny, but not. At the end of the day, and with the atomized the Arctic, there were 2,615 nuclear explosions. You can see all of them on climateviewer.org, which is my map website. I mapped out all 2,600 freaking nuclear explosions. And you can see a lot, I would say at least 20-30% of those happened in the Arctic, because they did try to atomize the Arctic. So why? At the end of the day, why? Because at the end of the day, if you Google this, screw Google, if you DuckDuckGo this, put it in quotations, new Cold War in quotations, and then put Arctic drilling. And what you'll realize is, while they're busy talking about polar bears and shit, they're not telling you about the fact that we've been fracking the entire Arctic on the North Slope of Alaska for a long time. That we're in a war with Russia over drilling rights in the Arctic. That there have been ships and near misses and planting of flags and a whole lot of bitching and skullduggery going over all of the oil and methane reserves that are trapped under the Greenland ice sheets, and that they want to be able to drill, they want to be able to frack. It's, that and opening the shipping lanes, around the northern polar ice cap. It's been a long time discussion. So you have this tug of war between the oil barons who want to and have always wanted to melt the poles. And then you've got the climatards that want to follow the technocracy movement and say, but we can get a whole lot of control of human resources and control individuals' lives by using this as a cudgel. So when you combine the two together, you go, but wait, who makes the fuel that's going in the planes that's making the clouds that are melting the poles? And then you realize, so that's what's really going on here. So the same guys that are making the fuel for the planes are making the fuel for these international shipping tankers and are making all the clouds that are trapping all the heat that are actually melting the poles. Has nothing to do with CO2. Absolutely nothing at all. And at the same time, it's called greenwashing. They pretend that they are going green. So now they're using biofuels for contrail control. You can look that up. The idea that they would use camelina-based HEFA fuels and Fischer-Tropsch, landfill waste to jet fuel conversion, all this crap they're coming up with. Bill Gates is now one of the largest farmers on the planet because he wants to be able to grow gasoline. They're talking about converting, a large percentage of the United States corn production to producing ethanol for jet fuel, which would basically, make people starve because for everything. And the farmers would be screwed because they feed their, livestock that. All of this, interweaves into, it's all about control, stupid. Yeah. And at the end of the day, the people who have been in power, anytime somebody threatens that, they're going to find a way to retain power. And the power is where the money's at. And the money's always been, whether it was Standard Oil in the back, JP Morgan, these people are going to try to retain power at all costs. So through buying influence, through guaranteeing that they can march towards getting that ultimate goal, which is that rich black soup at the North Pole. Mm-hmm. Screw the polar bears. Everything else is PR, and it's just like, it's the moon landing on a freaking movie set. We're gonna make sure that you see this picture of this dying polar bear and not tell you we put a tracking collar on it that made it sick. Right. I could tell you 100 stories like this. It's just so sad. But, the polar bears are now mating with the grizzly bears. It's just crazy. The life will continue on despite anything we do. If we all nuke ourselves into oblivion, the cockroaches will have cell phones in 1,000 years. The climate will always change.
Yeah.
And they're going to continue to tell you it's all your fault. But we don't have the kind of impact that these globalist retards do. No. Because they're the ones that drive the policy. They're the ones that got the fat wallet from all the lobbyists that allow them to continue to do pollution on a massive scale and or large scale climate manipulations through sounding rockets, through ionospheric heaters, through large scale cloud seeding projects where right now in China, the Chinese People's Liberation Army is covering the entire Tibetan plateau with several 100,000 cloud seeding generators in the world's largest weather modification project to date. When I spoke with James Roger Fleming, who is from Colby University, he's the leading historian on weather modification history. I interviewed him at the 21st conference on planned and inadvertent weather modification at the American Meteorological Society in 2018 annual meeting. He said, when we were talking via Twitter, I showed him a map and I said, would you consider this geoengineering? And he said, yes, on a scale that large, we're not talking about the butterfly effect anymore. We're talking about the Mothra effect.
Yeah, no kidding.
And that really stuck with me because we're talking Godzilla and Mothra for those who are old enough to know what we're talking about. But look, just Google it, Mothra. Don't Google it, DuckDuckGo it. Screw Google. Right. Gonna keep saying that. But the idea that people are making these, large scale interventions in the climate intentionally for the purposes of controlling resources goes right back to the heart of technocracy. That water has been dubbed blue gold, as water will be to the next century what oil was to the last century.
Yeah.
Retired Lieutenant Colonel David Kaczynski said that. And he was talking about using the rivers of the troposphere, and they've actually devised technology to steer tropospheric rivers or atmospheric rivers. So when you're talking about these large scale man-made control of weather. I tell people, don't talk to me about climate change unless you know about the climate changers. So you have these individuals who have the power and at least the will and the money to try. It's all an experiment. There is no weather control. It's just organized chaos. They are the modern day snake oil salesmen. They promise you rain, but they really have no idea what's going to happen. It does not stop them from doing it. And a quick re-primer on the CIA. The CIA and Henry Kissinger did Operation Popeye, which was weather warfare over Vietnam, with only 19 individuals that even knew what was going on. And the Secretary of Defense had no clue that it was even going on. It was that top secret.
Whoa. I've heard of Operation Popeye, but what were they doing? Were they just cloud seeding to make it so that it was raining too much and people...
Their slogan was "Make mud, not war." And they were using not only silver iodide, which is a silver salt, they were using lead iodide. So they were dumping lead on top of all of the agents, like Agent Orange.
Yeah.
Our Vietnamese, Vietnam soldiers got a healthy dose of lead rain. And they did this over Laos from 1969 through, I think, 1974 for like 5 years straight, top secret. And it was Jack Anderson who found a note on Lyndon Johnson's desk and published it in the Pentagon Papers, which led to the Weather Modification Reporting Act of 1972, which requires anybody in America who's going to modify the weather to report it to NOAA. And it led to the Environmental Modification Convention, which is a weather warfare ban at the United Nations in 1978. And at the same time this was going on, the CIA was also doing weather warfare over Cuba. And they were actually cloud seeding in the Gulf of Mexico to make it not rain. And this is something most people don't know about, and it's called a rain embargo. And the goal was... We love
embargoes on Cuba, don't we?
Oh, we do. And
rain embargoes.
Even the weather will even
we're such fuckers, aren't we?
Freaking weather. So yeah, their goal was with Project Nile Blue. It probably has a code name. It's never fully come to light, and they deny it ever existed. But you have firsthand accounts. I've got the newspaper articles and the receipts to prove it. That their goal was to embargo rain going to the sugar crops to kill Castro's main export to run him out of money. And this was in 1969. So you combine these two known weather warfare facts with what's going on today, with a brigadier general from Iran saying, Israel and surrounding countries are stealing our clouds. With back in 2012 and 2011, 2 years in a row, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad saying European countries are stealing Iran's rain. To think that weather warfare is still not an ongoing problem is just to be completely ignorant, because those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it. And that's the slogan on weathermodificationhistory.com. Most people do not know this 100-year history of steering hurricanes, all of this sort of thing. They did Project Storm Fury during the 70s, and this was NOAA basically, going out and seeding all of these different hurricanes. They did Project Cirrus before it. It was literally, cloud seeding was invented in November of 1946. And by October of 1947, they were already trying to steer hurricanes.
My God.
With cloud seeding at the General Electric labs.
Back to the China-Tibet situation, where they're what is the purpose of that? You said it's resource-based. They're trying to generate clouds on the Tibetan border that obviously is in the Himalayas, which then impacts India, Pakistan, and all of Central Asia and Southern Asia. These really well, really poor parts of the world. What's the end game with China doing that?
A water wars, plain and simple. And in fact, the Indians, dots not feathers, they're pretty upset about it because the Brahmaputra is one of the largest, tributaries from the Himalayas, and the Chinese have already, dammed up. China has more dams than anywhere else in the world combined. And they're damming up the Mekong River, which flows all the way down, Cambodia, Vietnam, all of that area. So pretty much it's the same thing as in the Rocky Mountains. So in the Rocky Mountains in America, those tributaries coming off the mountaintops, when they melt in the spring, they pretty much provide the entire West Coast with water.
Right.
So from October through March of every single year since 1949, we've done what's called orographic cloud seeding. And the idea is that you put cloud seeding generators at the base of a mountain, and that the wind on, like, say, the western side of the Rockies would then carry those sprinkles up on top of the mountain and create artificial snow. That's called snowpack augmentation.
Okay.
And so you create all this artificial snow during the wintertime so that in the summertime it melts and you have extra water. Well, the Himalayas, being as large as they are and having as many tributaries as they do, the Chinese want to create as much snow as possible on top of the Himalayas so that when it melts, they can control it through dams and locks and actually move it to the real population centers in the north of China. But what does that mean for all the poor countries surrounding China? Fuck them. That's what it means.
Fuck them. Right.
I mean, seriously, that's what it means. So at the end of the day, they're screaming bloody murder about this because, it is a water war. It is about the control of resources, and water is becoming an increasingly demanding, like you said, water will be to the next century what oil was to the last. So technocrats want to control all of the resources, whether it's energy resources, natural resources, or human resources.
Yeah.
And the mind is the ultimate place to control because, we would not let our enemies have guns. Why should we let them have ideas? Joseph Stalin.
Right.
So that's the idea, is that, we implant these boogeyman into the brains of individuals to make them believe they're the problem. So you have this, climate guilt. There's literally doctors now. You already know what I'm going to say. Say, well, you're sick because of climate guilt, and writing that on a freaking prescription pad. Yeah. We're in a sad place where people are so mind controlled. They're not. The solution is teaching critical thinking above all else.
Yeah.
Because if you have a good bullshit detector, if you are a critical thinker and you realize that believe none of what you hear and half of what you see, then you're going to be healthy the rest of your life. You're going to be a learner for the rest of your life. I try to tell people, don't trust everything I say because I'm only 45 and I don't have it all figured out. I started this over a decade ago. I'm constantly learning new things. But what I know so far is that nobody knows any of this stuff about weather control. Nobody talks about technocracy. Nobody talks about so many things. And the other thing I notice is that every single activist or personality has this thing, and they'll tell you, my shit is the most important shit you could ever listen to. Look at my shiny shit because it's so important. And we've got to be able to juggle. I mean, we all have to. We have to be prepared for the, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. I am prepared. I have my survival food rations, enough for a year. We've got enough guns and bullets for a small army. And luckily, I live in Sumter, South Carolina, where Black people and white people get along just fine. And, you know, I'm literally live in the Garden of Eden. I had 12 deer in my yard last night. So I'm not worried about any of that. But there are a lot of people that are in these urban centers who are literally just that is the goal of technocracy, is these megalopolis, mega cities, these that literally span state borders, and to centralize people into a place where they can be controlled. And people are fleeing. That's a good sign. Yeah. When you see that people are fleeing all of these large cities and realizing, you know, maybe this just isn't for me. I don't like paying more than half the money I make to a government that just wastes it. Maybe we will see a reversal. And I hope that that's the case.
Yeah. So we've got water wars, we've got weather wars, but we also have space wars, right? We have space, we have technology in space that is being used covertly. That we don't know for certain what's up there. We know we've got the X-37B doing 3 years of laps, the little mini space shuttle doing laps around the planet for a couple of years. And we say, hey, what's that thing doing up there? And their response is, none of your business.
Well, it's just a drone with an arm that can grab satellites and put bug chips on things and just pretend it's not. Could be laser beams in there. We could be just burning people up like My Science Project, the movie.
Sure.
Who knows? I mean, don't talk about it.
Then I see in China a couple of years ago the Tianjin explosion. And I go, and I've downloaded the video. It's like a minute video of some guy, an American guy who's in a high-rise building, and he's filming. You can tell he's like a Boston guy. Holy fucking shit. You know, this huge explosion, an explosion so big that it is almost incomprehensible. If I hadn't seen the video of it, I wouldn't believe that there was an explosion that big was even possible. Was that rod of God technology? Do we know if that's been used yet?
If I'm leaning more towards cyber weapon, simply because, you know, of the facts, you know, on the ground. So you're familiar with Stuxnet?
Yes.
Okay. So Stuxnet, for those who aren't, was, the NSA and the Mossad in Israel basically colluding to make a cyber weapon that used 4 zero-day viruses, malware, to infect the Siemens programmable logic controllers, PLCs, on the actual centrifuges in the Bashir nuclear plant in Iran. And what they did was they told the people in the nuclear power plant, in the control room, everything's fine. So on their screens, everything looked great. Meanwhile, the centrifuges were going, you know, we're not supposed to go over like 3,500 RPMs. Let's go 10,000. And that actually caused the reactors to explode. So now we've like bridged the gap between, you know, just some virus that can, you know, infect your PC and steal your keystrokes and your personal information, to blowing up physical objects in the real world with cyber weapons. And they also blew up oil, you know, some oil pipelines and some other things with some of these cyber weapons. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that simply just changing the rocket fuel burn, interrupting the processes between the command center and the rocket taking off. I mean, I know guys that could do that. That's the sad part. And also scary as hell. You know, if you watch DEF CON or the Black Hat Convention, DEFCON, you'll see, young kids going up there on stage going, hey, we were able to make a plane, a passenger aircraft nosedive. We were able to hack the, pilot's controls and take control of the plane. We were able to lock up the brakes on the Cadillac using the OnStar, just totally crash the freaking car. God forbid you got a self-driving car. They're going to have a field day with your ass. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I would lean more towards cyber weapon than rod of God because, and I state this very definitively, a rod of God type weapon, for those who don't know, is the idea that you would take, let's be real redneck about it, a telephone pole. So something the size of a telephone pole. If you just launched a telephone pole from space, that it would hit the ground with the impact of several atomic bombs because it's moving in like an asteroid at such a high velocity. It's not nuclear, so it's not going to leave a radioactive signature, but it would have a high impact velocity. So there would be a shock wave. And of course, that was experienced with that explosion because of all the fuel. The difference is that literally a rod of God, if properly designed, would probably be made of like tungsten or depleted uranium. And God forbid you use depleted uranium because that shit's heavy and it also gives off radioactive dust. Ask any Iraq war vet, because all the bullets and mortar shells were all, made of that. And now there's birth defects everywhere. I'm getting sidetracked, but regardless, a depleted uranium telephone pole launched from space could destroy my entire city in a blink. And you compound that with the fact that the Russians and Chinese have been very rapidly advancing hypersonic delivery systems. And by hypersonic, we're talking well above Mach 6. So if you were to have these type weapons, there is no defense system currently available that could stop them. Israel's Iron Dome with its lasers being able to shoot down some rockets or some mortar shells using lasers, that's well and all good and all, but being able to deploy even the strongest sodium lasers that we have, and we don't have technology that could actually track something moving that fast, let alone if there were several hundred or thousands of these launched simultaneously, there'd be no defense whatsoever. So yeah, the idea of, space-based weapons gets scarier by the second. Because they have so many weapons in their arsenal, from high-powered microwave, high charged particle beam accelerators, obviously rods of God, the artificial atmospheric lens, which was also known as the sun gun. Even the Nazis in World War II were trying to make this thing. But basically it's a magnifying glass in space to focus the sun's rays and burn up entire armies or cities. Well, they kind of made that. It was called the Artificial Ionospheric Mirror at HAARP in Gacona, Alaska, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. But what they were doing was basically creating a plasma fireball in space to reflect radio waves off of. But BAE Systems, defense contractor, came up with what's called the Laser Developed Atmospheric Lens, which sounds a lot like the sun gun or the atmospheric lens to focus sunlight, which was talked about by Gorodowski in 1958, 1928, something like that. It's on Weather Mod History. So the idea that they could take a laser and create an artificial ionospheric mirror, but use it as a lens to look through this hyper-focused lens and use it for spy satellite optics, to where they could literally count the hairs in your nostril from space using the drone we were talking about earlier, the NASA drone, right. That you could put a laser on that thing and some spy satellite optics create an artificial atmospheric lens, and then use that as like a Hubble telescope for the ground.
Right.
But the reverse is true also. If you can create an atmospheric lens, which lets you focus on really small objects, then couldn't you do the same thing to focus the energy of the sun on targets as a weapon? The more you read about the technology that's advancing, the more you go, we're going into a deep, dark place, because it's geophysical warfare. It's using the natural systems of the planet as a weapon. And that's a scary place.
Yeah, it is. And let's wrap up with this last topic. And it's kind of, I think it fits nicely into this, unfortunately, in a bad way. The fires in California, in Oregon, how much of this was made to happen? Was through drying out the area. I live in Colorado now. I grew up in California, lived there almost my whole life. Love California. What it has become is disgusting.
California stan.
Yeah, it's been really bad from a social part. But now, and I remember in the summers, you'd get fires in Laguna Canyon or Malibu Hills or someplace, there's a lot of dry brush and things like that. We never had never-ending fires when I was a kid, and now we do. And I know that people have overlaid the map of the California high-speed rail proposed system over where the fires went. I don't know if that necessarily is accurate and lining up, but what I do know is that I've never seen so much fire danger in California as we've seen in the last 15 years. And I'm beginning to think that it is not accidental. What are your thoughts on the California fires?
I always say to people that when you're looking for a one-size-fits-all answer to a question, you're probably expecting too much. And I always see things like, at least when I was younger, and especially when I started my path on, seeking truth, I was more inclined to just believe the most simple answer. And, as I've grown older, I've realized that things are much more complex, and there's usually multiple answers to a question. So forgive me when I give you multiple answers. So
I want them all.
I see several factors here. And of course, first and foremost is the climate change agenda affecting forestry management. They've actually banned people from going in and clearing out deadwood from the forest. They've also implemented what's called hack and squirt. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Hack and squirt is where they go up to a tree and they take an axe and they chip away the bark on the side of it, and then they squirt industrial strength Roundup or other herbicides like Agent Orange, and then they leave the tree to die. Oh. And they do this because they call them invasive species or forestry management. That ain't forestry management. And if it were forestry management, then you'd go back, and whenever the tree died, you'd clear out that dead timber, which is creating a huge tinderbox waiting to be lit. Interestingly enough, when Trump went to California, and I'm not, I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat. I'm for anybody who just, I voted for a human hand grenade when I voted for Trump. I wanted somebody to just blow it up, and so I could sit back and laugh the entire time, and I got more than I paid for.
Yeah, we all did.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, he nailed it right on the head when he went there, and he said, well, what I see is poor forestry management. And, he really didn't get into the details of what all that means, but that's where I would start, because at the end of the day, if you're not doing forestry management like we do in South Carolina, creating fire breaks, make sure the forests are maintained, and not doing stupid shit like hack and squirt and large aerial spraying of industrial herbicides, which are the same thing as Agent Orange, just rebranded, made by the same assholes that made Agent Orange, just rebranded. I hear stories from people from California, Oregon, and Washington all the time about, big planes coming in, helicopters coming in, spraying entire large portions of the forest. All the trees turn white and they die standing up. So this is not a surprise to me whatsoever. You combine that with all of the international shipping that's off the coast. They create what the CIA did to Cuba. They create what's called overseeding. This is the same thing that Moscow did during the Chernobyl nuclear meltdown.
Really?
And this is the same thing that Beijing tried to do during the 2008 Olympics to keep it from raining on the Olympics. The idea that if you create too many cloud seeds or specks of dust, things that water condense on, that the water droplets don't get large enough to ever fall on the ground. So you have a certain balance of water vapor and a certain balance of seeds. And they have to be in perfect harmony for there to be enough water to stick to the seeds to get big enough to fall on the ground. If you put too much pollution up there, if you put too much intentional weather modification, for example, Sacramento Municipal Utility District just paid $990,000 for cloud seeding in Sacramento. Mm-hmm. It's not going to help, because if there's not enough water vapor there, it's not going to matter how much you cloud seed. You're just making the problem worse. So you have all of these ships off the coast, which was where the water vapor should be coming in from, putting all of these cloud seeds into the air, creating all this marine stratocumulus ship tracks, to the point where if you look at the satellite on any given day, 100 to 200 miles off the coast, there ain't a cloud in sight, because all of that water vapor has been scavenged by all the pollution from all of the Chinese tankers coming in and out. That combined with, my experience when I was 16 years old of coming to Los Angeles and then going to Magic Mountain and Universal Studios from South Carolina, I couldn't breathe in 2 days. I literally was at Magic Mountain and I developed asthma-like symptoms and had to go indoors and put like a mask on and everything. And there are people that live in that shit. I
did for many, many years.
Yeah. So if you combine the offshore pollution with the onshore pollution, with all of the fracking wells that are, soaking up all of the water all along California and their methane emissions, you combine all of these together and you create a scenario where if there were any water vapor available over California that could fall as rain, there's so much shit and soup in the sky, it'll never fall as rain. What it will do is eventually gather enough water vapor as it moves across America to create floods elsewhere. And that's what we have. If you look at the United States, you can draw a line at the Mississippi River. Weather modification projects on the West Coast, none on the East Coast. Drought on the West Coast, basketball-sized hail on the East Coast. Torrential flooding on the East Coast. This has been the case for many, many years. And then come springtime, you have, especially all of the states bordering the Rocky Mountains, massive flooding, destroying large areas of cropland. So when I look at what the West Coast problem, I can flip the quarter either way. It's part pollution, part poor, climate change, forestry management. But then I'm going to give you the flip side to it, because way back in 1950 or 1850, there was a guy named James Pollard Espy. And he said he was known as the Storm King. And he had this philosophy of storms, wherein he said it would be a great idea to create rainfall for the breadbasket of America and the East Coast by lighting fires on the West Coast.
Oh. Uh-oh.
So which is true? which is more likely true? I'm going to leave that one for you to chew on.
Wow.
But that is the first entry in my timeline. And I could have gone back further, gunpowder at Antietam causing it to rain on the blood-soaked battlefields, Chinese rockets and, fireworks creating Indian dances, and how, stirring up aluminum dust is a cloud seed, along with, pounding drums to make resonant frequencies. We could have gone way back, but we started at 1800 because that's when the dawn of science and meteorology really occurred. And James Pollard Espy talking about creating forest fires on the West Coast to make rain on the East Coast seemed like a good starting point.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow, what a crazy. I wish these people would just leave us alone. Just quit fucking with us, messing with the weather. This is the law of unintended consequences. When you start monkeying with the weather and it has impacts that you can't even predict, and the butterfly effect.
Such a complex system.
So
that we barely understand it. Now they'll claim that they understand it well enough to make predictions about what the temperature of the planet's going to be in 100 years. But I check the weather every day, and I look at the 7-day forecast, and I usually take screenshots. And 7 days from now, it's completely freaking different. They have no clue. They had to cancel 60% of the sorties in Iraq because the United States military couldn't predict the fucking weather tomorrow.
Wow.
Yeah. So climate science is junk. They don't understand shit about shit. And that's the way it's going to be for a very long time. And the only practical solutions that have even been proposed is through using cybernetics and millions of swarms of microsensors at every layer of the atmosphere to finally start to understand what the hell's even going on. But I have a solution, and it's at climateviewer.com/nmod, ENMOD, climateviewer.com/nmod. And it's the Environmental Modification Accountability Act. And the idea is real simple, that they banned weather warfare in 1978, but they made no way to actually catch somebody in the act. And though we have Weather Modification Reporting Act of 1972 here in America, there is no worldwide requirement to divulge in advance before you do atmospheric experimentation. So what I'm proposing is that an international registry be created where at a minimum 48 hours before you do any kind of weather modification, geoengineering, boring holes in clouds with lasers, steering lightning bolts with lasers, ionospheric heating, steering atmospheric rivers, any type of atmospheric experimentation, that you have to give a 48-hour notice prior to doing it. Tell us why, where, when, and how. That way, if you do create a tornado or you create a flood, you can at least be sued.
Right.
And if you don't tell us and we catch you with our sensor network, one government-based, run by all of the satellites and the best of the best of the best, and one citizen-powered, because I don't trust the fucking government.
As you shouldn't.
Because during the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear meltdown, they turned off EPA's RADNet, the radiation detection network. So who's to say that they wouldn't just cut off the weather warfare detection system?
Of course.
We need to have a citizen-powered one as well. I hope to create one day. That's the whole idea behind Climate Viewer, a climate viewer for your backyard. It tests the rain. It tells you what chemicals fell in your rain. It watches your sky. It checks for electromagnetic frequencies and reports all this live in real time on a map. But the Environmental Modification Accountability Act would be a way of saying, tell us in advance. If you don't, and we catch you, you just did weather warfare. We have to assume that your intentions are nefarious because you did not tell us. Right. And that's the only way that you could ever give teeth to the Environmental Modification Treaty of 1978, the weather warfare ban. So back to your question about California. Do we know? No, we don't. And why don't we know? Because nobody ever tried to know. And the only way we're going to know is if we demand accountability and transparency. And as much as I hate the United Nations, this is a worldwide problem. So this is one of those cases where you already have a law in the books. All these countries have already agreed to it. Now give it some freaking teeth. Then take it to your local level and expand down to down to your city council and literally ban weather, modification in your city. But you got to start somewhere. And I think that at least by getting the Environmental Modification Accountability Act passed into law, and if an international registry were ever created, it at least would have a global awakening effect to the fact that all of these companies and all of these militaries are involved in controlling all of this weather that they blame on climate change, that they tell you made. And I think that's bullshit.
I think it is too. You've got multiple websites. ClimateViewer.com is the main one that I've been going to. Where are the other places that people can find your work?
Well, you can find me on YouTube. Just type in Climate Viewer, all one word. I have ClimateViewer.com. That's my main hub, my blog. I'm actually revising it right now because I have 35,000 reference links on it to external websites. And over the past decade, some of them have turned into Chinese porn sites. Who knows? Most of them were government resources. So they realized all people were coming from my blog and decided to, delete that as fast as possible. So you'd have to check archive.org for it. But regardless, search engines don't really smile on broken links that go to possibly malware at the time. So I'm revising it. I just revised weathermodificationhistory.com. It is completely brand new. It was created in 2016. It was completely revised about a month or two ago. I spent a year and a half doing that. And we have 875 newspaper articles from 1800 to present and over 150 timeline entries and more references than you can shake a stick at, all in MLA format. So if you're in college and you want to write an interesting paper, I already did all the work for you. Just go literally rip it off. It's Creative Commons. Everything I do is free. I give it away. I just ask for donations on Patreon and PayPal. And finally, climateviewer.org, which is Climate Viewer Maps, is the birth of the start of what I hope to eventually be our citizen-powered network of world observation system, coupled with over 660 maps, which include everything from live fire monitoring, earthquakes, smoke, air quality, satellites, every single NASA satellite feed, every single EU METSAT feed, pretty much every sensor I could find on the planet already is on there. And when you check it, it's live. And it says it's live, it's live. And then there's an educational section, which are maps that myself and George Stiller created that range everything from like the Oregon Trail to World War I and II to every single ionospheric heater on the planet, the 50 years of the United Nations tracking weather modification projects, 2,615 nuclear explosions, chemical weapons dumped at sea, just you name it, it's in there. So that's climateviewer.org. And I have a cesium 3D globe where you can actually, spin the ball around and look at how things line up. The interesting thing about it is that my first aha moment, and the reason why I created this, was because I had overlaid a map of fracking wells. And then I turned on my US drought monitor and saw that it was where all the fracking wells were. Mm-hmm. And then I put all the cloud seeding projects in, and bam, they were all in the same place. And it made sense to me that if you use up all the water, using billions of gallons to frack the ground, you create drought, and then somebody pays to fill the reservoirs back up. And that's how connecting the dots works.
They're such fuckers. I hate these people.
Yeah. For me personally, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and a map like climateviewer.org is worth several million, because being able to connect all of these disparate, pieces of information and then see it and visualize it and go, I see what's going on now. I can see the problem. That's priceless. So yeah, I really appreciate you having me on. It's been a fun discussion.
That's Jim Lee, everybody. Go support his work. Go follow him. Go watch his videos and check out the website. And if you like this episode, take the additional step right now of sharing it with your friends and family. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jim, for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Everybody share this. Sharing is caring. Thanks for having me, Charlie.
Certainly is. Thanks, everybody. Take care.